You already gave God an answer. You just did not know a question had been asked. That is why the last season felt so confusing. Nothing announced itself as a test. There was only silence, delay, rejection, and moments when going backward looked easier than moving forward. But something changed inside you. You did not become perfect. You still felt pain. You still had nights when your faith felt thin and your mind felt tired. Yet after the emotion passed, you kept returning to the same ground. You returned to integrity. You returned to discernment. You returned to what you knew was right. A real test of character cannot depend on you knowing that you are being tested. If you knew every difficult moment was being graded, you could prepare a performance. You could act patient, because patience was expected. You could forgive, because forgiveness was clearly part of the assignment. But your hardest moments did not look important. The unanswered message looked personal. The closed door looked unfair. The lonely night looked empty. The temptation to chase what had already wounded you looked ordinary. Yet those were the moments that revealed who was actually in control. Think about that carefully. What did you do when nobody promised a reward? What did you choose when no one was watching? What happened when you could have returned to the old pattern and nobody would have blamed you? The answer may be the first evidence that you already passed. You did not pass because everything worked out. You passed because disappointment stopped having the same authority over you. You passed because fear did not get the final vote. Even when you stumbled, you eventually returned to the person you were becoming instead of surrendering to the person you used to be. This is the invisible test. It does not arrive with a warning. It appears inside ordinary pressure, when life gives you enough discomfort to expose your reflexes before you can edit them. And that is why the season may have revealed more about you than an easy year ever could. Maybe you thought God had forgotten you. Maybe you thought the silence meant rejection. Maybe you thought the delay proved you were behind. But there is another way to read what happened. Not every hardship has to be labeled as something God directly sent. The deeper question is what the season revealed. Did the old need for approval still own you? Did rejection still decide your worth? Did loneliness still force you back toward people who drained your peace? Did uncertainty still make you abandon your values? Somewhere in that season, at least one of those old controls began to lose its power. That is first payoff you need. The test was not whether you could avoid pain. The test was whether pain could still choose for you. And if your reaction began to change, even slowly, then something important happened long before your circumstances caught up. If this lands somewhere personal, write, "I responded differently" below. Use it as a marker for yourself. Because the next part matters even more. You have seen that a hidden test can reveal you. Now you need to know exactly what God may have been watching inside that season. Once you see what was actually being tested, several moments you still call failures may start looking completely different. So what was God actually testing? Not your intelligence, not your ability to impress people, not how fast you could force a result. The deeper test was quieter. It was whether your character could stay aligned when the outcome gave you no reason to feel secure. The first part was integrity without applause. Could you still do what was right when nobody noticed? Could you walk away from something unhealthy, even when staying protected you from loneliness? That kind of choice reveals character. The second part was patience without certainty. Waiting is easy when you know the date. It is different when there is no schedule, no guarantee, and no visible sign that anything is moving. In that space, impatience offers shortcuts, and desperation starts pretending to be wisdom. Maybe you almost took one. Maybe you nearly called the person who would reopen the wound. Maybe you considered forcing a door that had already shown you resistance. But somewhere along the way, you learned that urgency does not always mean direction. Sometimes the strongest move is to remain still. The third part was discernment without validation. You had to recognize what was wrong before anyone agreed with you. You had to notice patterns before they became obvious. The human heart wants witnesses, but discernment becomes stronger when it no longer depends on outside permission. You begin to trust what consistent patterns have already shown you. The fourth part was identity without external confirmation. Could you remember who you were when the invitation never came? Could you stay grounded when another person misunderstood your silence, your boundaries, or your pace? This is where many people confuse delay with disqualification. They assume that if the door did not open, they must not be ready. But sometimes the closed door reveals whether your identity was attached to the door itself. If losing access destroys your sense of worth, the door had too much power. Think about Joseph. The prison did not look like promotion. The waiting did not look like preparation. Yet the visible setting was never the whole story. The point is not that every delay guarantees a palace. Character can be formed in places that do not look like progress. That may explain your season. You were watching for evidence in money, relationships, recognition, and timing, but the evidence was appearing inside your responses. You stopped chasing some people. You stopped explaining every boundary. You stopped treating every closed door like an emergency. That is what passing can look like before life changes around you. You pause before reacting. You ask better questions. You recover faster. You no longer sacrifice peace just to avoid disappointing someone. The old trigger appears, but it does not produce the same automatic answer. And there is one more thing you need to hear. You may still remember a moment when none of this looked true. A night when you broke down. A day when you doubted everything. A choice you wish you could erase. You may still be using that moment as proof that you failed. But what if that moment does not disqualify you at all? What if the part you are ashamed of is actually hiding the clearest evidence of your growth? That is where we have to go next. You may have a memory that still bothers you. A night when you cried harder than you expected. A moment when anger came out before wisdom did. A day when you questioned God, questioned yourself, and wondered whether everything you believed had been wrong. Maybe that is the moment you keep using against yourself. You tell yourself strong people would have handled it better. You think passing should have looked calm from beginning to end. But that idea confuses emotional pain with spiritual failure, and those are not the same thing. A reaction is not the same as a direction. You can feel fear without building your life around fear. You can become angry without letting anger become your identity. You can fall apart for a night and still return the next morning to the values you refuse to abandon. That return matters. Think about what happened after the breakdown. Did you stay bitter forever, or did you eventually soften? Did you keep chasing the person who hurt you, or did you finally create distance? That is where growth becomes visible. It is not always found in the cleanest moment. Sometimes it appears in the recovery. The old version of you may have stayed trapped for months. The current version still hurts, but notices sooner, returns sooner, and chooses differently when pressure comes back. You were never asked to become emotionless. Faith does not mean pretending pain is painless. Maturity does not mean never becoming tired. What matters is what your pain is allowed to control after it arrives. This is why one bad night cannot summarize an entire season. One moment of doubt does not cancel every time you kept moving without certainty. Judge your growth by the direction of your life, not one frame. Look back again. Things that used to keep you awake no longer own your whole week. People whose approval once controlled your mood cannot shake you the same way. Doors you once would have begged to reopen can now remain closed without destroying your peace. That is not numbness. It may be evidence that your center changed. You became less available for chaos. You became slower to panic when someone withdrew attention. Quietly, your standards changed. And here is the relief. You did not pass because you performed perfectly. You passed because the old pattern stopped winning every round. When you wandered, you returned. When you reacted, you reflected. When you fell, you did not build a home on the floor. So stop using your weakest hour as the final verdict on who you became. That hour may have exposed the wound, but your response afterward exposed the growth. The test was not whether you could avoid every crack. It was whether the crack would become the doorway back into your old life. Maybe now you can see why this season feels different. You are not the same person who entered it. Your boundaries are clearer. Your peace has become more expensive. And yet, there is still a question you cannot ignore. If you really passed, why does life still feel heavy? Why do you still overthink simple decisions? Why does your mind sometimes feel foggy when your spirit feels certain? Why can you know that a chapter is over and still wake up bracing for another problem? That contradiction is where the next part begins. Passing the test explains what changed in your character. It does not yet explain why part of you still feels like the test is happening. That contradiction has a name. It is the after-test gap. You can know that a chapter is over and still feel as if part of you is standing inside the old room. You can forgive someone and still tense when your phone lights up. You can trust God and still wake up expecting bad news. This does not automatically mean your faith is weak. It does not mean you missed the lesson. Sometimes understanding changes before your daily patterns change, because the mind and body can keep repeating responses that were practiced during long periods of pressure. The crisis can end before the feeling of crisis fully leaves. That is why simple choices can suddenly feel heavy. You know what you want, but you second-guess it. You sit down to focus, but your attention scatters. You walk into a good opportunity, but part of you immediately searches for the hidden danger. You want to rest, yet your mind keeps preparing for a problem that has not happened. Maybe you have called this spiritual confusion. Maybe you assumed you needed another sign. But what if the part of you that still feels trapped is not your faith at all? What if your spirit understood the lesson, while your internal patterns are still learning that the emergency has ended? Think about how survival works. When pressure lasts long enough, vigilance begins to feel normal. You check everything twice. You rehearse conversations. You imagine the worst case before allowing yourself to enjoy the best one. None of this makes you broken. It means your system learned repetition, and repetition can outlast the season that created it. This is the after-test gap. Your character moved forward, but some automatic responses stayed behind. That gap can feel like fog. It can look like indecision, mental fatigue, forgetfulness, or the strange habit of preparing for disappointment even when nothing is currently wrong. And here is where people often make the wrong conclusion. They assume that because peace does not feel immediate, the test must still be happening. They begin searching for another enemy, another warning, another hidden meaning. But sometimes there is no new battle to decode. Sometimes the next work is learning how to live after battle. There is also a practical side to this that almost nobody connects with spiritual growth. Researchers have spent decades studying how different parts of the brain specialize, communicate, and coordinate information. Later, I will show you why that matters here, and why clarity can become a practical issue after a long season of pressure. I am not saying every tired day has one explanation. I am not saying brain fog proves anything spiritual. The point is simpler. A person can reach a new understanding before attention, confidence, and decision-making feel fully restored. That distinction matters because it changes what moving forward requires. You may not need another dramatic test. You may need a calmer receiver. You may need enough internal quiet to notice what is already clear, enough focus to choose without circling the same decision, and enough safety inside yourself to stop treating every open door like a possible trap. That is why the next stage cannot be built only on endurance. Endurance carried you through the storm, but the skills that helped you survive can become exhausting when you keep using them after the sky has cleared. And that leads to the next truth. You survived by becoming very good at survival. Now you have to ask whether survival is still the mode you are meant to live in. For a long time, survival was useful. It taught you to watch carefully. It taught you to notice changes in people before they became obvious. It taught you how to keep moving when support disappeared. Those skills protected you in a season when uncertainty was real. But survival has a hidden cost. What protects you during danger can restrict you during peace. You become so good at reading every room that you forget how to simply enter one. You become so independent that receiving help feels uncomfortable. You prepare for disappointment before anything has had the chance to go well. Maybe you call it discernment. Sometimes it is. But sometimes it is an old alarm wearing a wise face. You learn to control variables because uncertainty hurt. You learn to need less because depending on people became dangerous. You learn to keep your plans private because being misunderstood exhausted you. None of those responses deserve shame. They may have helped you survive exactly what you had to survive. The problem begins when protection becomes identity. Then every opportunity must prove it will not hurt you. Every relationship must survive an invisible trial. Every peaceful moment is followed by a question about when the next problem will arrive. You are physically present in a new season, but mentally you are still guarding the old one. This may be why progress has felt strange. The test may already be over, while your system still behaves as though the examination continues. That is the midpoint you need to understand. You are not necessarily waiting for God to remove another obstacle. You may be learning how to stop recreating the posture that an old obstacle required. Consider hyper-independence. It can look like strength because you never need anyone. But if a healthy opportunity arrives through another person, the same independence can make you reject support before you examine it. Consider constant vigilance. It once helped you detect danger, but now it can make calm feel suspicious. Even over-preparing can become a cage. You tell yourself you need one more sign before acting. Meanwhile, the moment passes. Protection slowly turns into hesitation. This is where the question from earlier returns. Why can you know that you have changed and still react as if danger is coming? Why does insight remain insight instead of becoming ease? The answer is not another motivational sentence. It is connected to the condition of the receiver. Imagine a message arriving clearly, but the receiver is overloaded with noise. The message may be present, yet your ability to notice and act on it can still feel compromised. That does not make the message false. It means clarity depends partly on the condition through which information is being processed. This is why the next season asks for more than endurance. You already proved that you can survive pressure. Now, you need the capacity to receive peace without interrogating it, support without resisting it, and opportunity without automatically preparing for loss. The old skills were not your enemy. They simply had a season. Honor what protected you, then stop asking it to lead everything that comes next. Because the missing piece is not another prophecy about your future. It is understanding what helps the receiver become clearer in the present. That is where the spiritual story meets something surprisingly practical. Here is the practical distinction. Spiritual willingness and mental clarity are not the same thing. You can believe deeply and still feel mentally scattered. You can know what matters and still struggle to hold attention on it. That is what I mean by the receiver principle. A clear signal is easier to use when the receiver can process it clearly. This is only an analogy. Faith is not a machine, and no product can manufacture divine guidance. The point is simpler. Your ability to notice, evaluate, and act still involves the brain you use every day. Scientists have long studied how the two hemispheres of the brain specialize in different functions while still working together. The product materials point to split brain research associated with Roger Sperry, whose work was recognized with a Nobel Prize. That research did not prove the product I am about to mention. It did help establish that different regions can contribute differently, while coordinated processing still matters. The creators built their own approach around the idea of encouraging more coordinated activity. Before I tell you what it is, consider 2 user reports. A woman from California said she had already tried prayer, journaling, meditation, and other spiritual practices. She still felt disconnected, as if she understood the words, but could not feel clear direction in daily life. According to her testimonial, after using the audio consistently, she felt that inner fog begin to lift. She described feeling more connected and more able to sense direction again. That is her reported experience, not a guarantee that everyone will feel the same result. A man from Texas described a different problem. He had spent years carrying responsibility, while his own mental life became tired. Decisions felt harder. Fog had become so normal that he barely recognized it anymore. According to his testimonial, consistent use was followed by a clearer and more focused mental experience. 2 people, 2 starting points. Neither story proves a universal outcome, but both raise the same question: what happens when the receiver feels clearer? The tool is called the Genius Switch. It is a digital audio sequence designed to be listened to for about 8 minutes a day with headphones. Its creators call the approach neural sync technology, and they describe the goal as supporting more coordinated activity across the brain. This is not a replacement for prayer, discernment, medical care, or healthy habits. It is a practical support tool. You listen. You do not need to force a special state. You do not need to repeat a mantra or perform another complicated ritual. That matters after a hard season. The last thing you need is another practice that feels like another examination. 8 minutes is small enough to become a simple daily experiment. You can sit quietly, use headphones, and let the sequence play without turning the process into a performance. The product materials describe this as whole brain activation. That is their language for the mechanism. It is not proof that listening will create a specific spiritual, financial, or health outcome. The reason it belongs here is more grounded. Character can change before circumstances do. Clarity may also need practical support while you leave survival mode. Not because your faith failed, not because God stopped speaking, because attention, decision-making, and mental steadiness matter when you are trying to live differently. This is for the person who has already reflected, prayed, learned, and released, yet still wants a simple ritual that may support clearer daily functioning. It is not another prophecy. It is a tool you can evaluate for yourself. You do not need to believe that an audio track contains a blessing. Understand the proposed mechanism, review the terms, then decide whether the experiment fits your life. In the next part, I will show you why this option is designed to be easy to evaluate, what you receive, and how the price and guarantee change the risk of trying it. The reason this option may feel easier to evaluate is simple. It does not ask you to rebuild your entire day. You do not need another exhausting routine. You do not need an hour of preparation. The Genius Switch is designed around about 8 minutes of listening with headphones. After a season, when everything demanded effort, the next tool does not need to become another test. That matters. A simple practice is easier to repeat, and repetition is what allows you to judge whether something actually helps you. You listen, observe your own experience, and decide from there. The product also comes with lifetime digital access. That means you are not racing against a short subscription window. You can return to the audio as part of your routine and evaluate it at your own pace. According to the product page, the regular listed price is $49, while the current offer is $39. The package also includes 4 digital bonuses. These are a guided visualization, a grocery guide, a classic manifestation book, and a 5 habits infographic. Those extras are not the main reason to consider it. The core decision is still whether an 8-minute audio practice makes sense for you, but the bonuses add context around focus, daily habits, and intentional living without asking you to purchase separate materials. The offer also includes a money-back guarantee under the seller terms. That matters because a guarantee changes the nature of the decision. You are not being asked to treat one testimonial like a promise. You are being invited to review the details, try the process, and judge your own experience within the stated guarantee period. And notice what this decision should not be. It should not be fear. It should not be pressure. It should not be the thought that God will withhold something if you do not buy. You pass this season by learning to choose from alignment instead of panic, so make this decision the same way. If the proposed mechanism makes sense to you, the official product page is linked below. Read the page. Look at the guarantee. Review what is included. Then decide for yourself whether 8 minutes a day is an experiment worth making. There is no need for fake urgency. There is no countdown inside this message. The more useful question is different. If the last season taught you to stop postponing the person you know you need to become, does postponing a simple experiment still make sense to you? Only you can answer that. And you do not need to buy anything for the message of this video to remain true. Your growth is not for sale. Your identity is not locked behind a checkout page. The product is only a practical tool that may support the clarity you want to cultivate. If you choose to look at it, use the official page linked below, rather than relying on unrelated audio tracks with similar names. Review the seller information directly so you know exactly what you are considering. You have spent too long letting fear make decisions in advance. Do not repeat that pattern here. Do not buy from fear, and do not reject from fear. Look at the facts, notice your own response, and choose from a quieter place. Because the next breakthrough is bigger than a product. You survived by learning endurance, but endurance was never meant to become your permanent identity. The final test is not whether you can keep suffering. It is whether you can finally receive what peace requires from you. The final test is reception. That may sound easier than endurance, but for someone trained by survival, receiving can feel strangely dangerous. You know how to brace. You know how to carry weight. You know how to function when the answer is no. But what happens when the answer begins to become yes? Can you receive help without suspecting a hidden cost? Can you accept a healthy opportunity without searching for the trap? Can you let a peaceful week remain peaceful without preparing for collapse? This is where the next version of you begins. Survival taught you to endure disappointment. Reception asks you to tolerate possibility. Survival taught you to expect loss. Reception asks you to remain present when something good stays. Survival taught you to do everything alone. Reception asks whether support can enter without threatening your sense of control. That is a different kind of courage. It is quieter. It does not look dramatic from the outside. You simply stop interrogating every good thing before it has a chance to grow. Imagine waking up with less internal noise. You do not scan the room for danger before your feet touch the floor. A decision appears, and you can examine it without turning it into 20 imaginary disasters. You finish what matters because your attention is not constantly being stolen by the expectation of another emergency. You begin to recognize opportunities sooner. You say no faster when something is wrong. You say yes more calmly when something is right. Your intuition becomes easier to hear because anxiety is no longer shouting over every possibility. This is not about becoming careless. Discernment still matters. Boundaries still matter. Wisdom still matters. But wisdom does not require permanent tension. You can be careful without being afraid of everything. Now, do something simple. Close your eyes for a moment if you are somewhere safe. Picture the room that represents the hardest season you just survived. See the chair. See the door. See the version of you who spent so long trying to understand why everything felt like an examination. Now stand up in that image. Walk toward the door. Put your hand on it. And tell yourself, the test is over. I do not need survival to prove my faith. Let your shoulders drop. Open your hands. Breathe without preparing for the next blow. You are not erasing what happened. You are telling your system that the lesson can remain even when the emergency leaves. Stay there for one more moment. Notice what it would feel like to walk into a season where peace is not suspicious, where clarity is not something you have to force, where receiving does not make you weak. Because this is the truth hidden underneath the whole message. You already proved you can survive uncertainty. The next responsibility is to stop making uncertainty your home. And before we close, there is one declaration you need to make after you mentally leave that examination room. It is not a prediction. It is a decision about how you will live from this point forward. Look back at what you carried. Look at what you released. Look at how many times you returned to yourself after fear tried to pull you backward. You are still here, and you are not standing here as the same person who entered that season. You learned that rejection does not define worth. You learned that silence does not require panic. You learned that a closed door does not deserve your identity. Most importantly, you learned that pain can speak loudly without being allowed to make the final decision. So, release the need to keep proving yourself. Release the expectation that every good thing will disappear. Release the habit of forcing what needs to be clear on its own. Release the identity that only knows how to feel valuable while struggling. Now say this within yourself. I am no longer living inside an examination that has ended. I do not need pain to prove that I am faithful. I can carry peace without waiting for it to disappear. I can receive without sabotaging what I asked for. I can move with clarity instead of panic. I can become responsible for what comes next without dragging every old fear into a new room. That is the declaration. Not that life will never challenge you again. Not that every door will open. Not that every day will feel easy. The declaration is that the last season no longer gets to govern the next one. You passed because you became different when no one told you the moment counted. You passed in the quiet decisions. You passed when you returned after doubt. You passed when the old reaction stopped winning every round. And now the second question has an answer too. Why did part of you still feel stuck after the lesson was learned? Because character, insight, attention, and survival patterns do not always change at the same speed. Understanding can arrive before the rest of you feels safe enough to follow. That does not erase the growth. It explains the gap. And once you can name the gap, you no longer have to confuse it with failure. If the practical tool we discussed makes sense to you, the official information is below. Review it carefully and decide for yourself. You do not need it to prove your faith, and you do not need it to validate what you survived. But you do need one decision today. Stop sitting in an examination room you have already left. If this message is yours, write, "The test is over" below. Let that be the marker. Let it remind you that endurance was the lesson, not the destination. You can honor the person who survived without asking that version of you to lead forever. You can thank survival for carrying you through and still choose peace as the way you move forward. You passed what you did not know you were taking. You do not have to keep taking the same test. The door is open now. Walk out with what you learned, leave behind what you no longer need, and step into what comes next with peace. Amen.